When I was a child, my parents abandoned me because I wasn't as smart as my twin sister. Years later, when they tried to rebuild our relationship, I introduced them to my new family, but things didn't go smoothly. 10 years ago, when I was 12, my parents sent me to live with my uncle, my father's elder brother, in a village. They no longer wanted to take care of me, believing I was a burden. Instead, they chose to focus on raising my twin sister, whom they considered much smarter than me. And I don't deny it. She was indeed far more intelligent than I was. Unfortunately, I could never keep up with her. I was just an average girl, and in a family full of overachievers and geniuses, being average was equivalent to failure. Both my parents were doctors, and they decided that my sister and I would also become doctors. But honestly, I was never interested in studying. I was always drawn to creativity. That was what I wanted to do in life. My parents put immense pressure on me, and since I performed poorly in school, the situation worsened. Instead of supporting me, they humiliated me and constantly compared me to my sister. From childhood, I had grown used to such treatment, but as I got older, it only became worse. It was hard for me to focus on anything. By the time I was 12, I had failed nearly all my subjects despite trying my best. My grades kept deteriorating, and my teachers often complained about me. They had no idea what was happening at home and assumed I was lazy and unwilling to try. Even my classmates compared me to my successful sister, who excelled in her studies. I cried almost every night before bed because every day, my parents reminded my sister how much they loved her while telling me what a disappointment I was. They constantly said I needed to try harder to meet their expectations. One evening during dinner, after they insulted me again for my grades, I couldn't take it anymore and lashed out. As a result, I was punished, confined to the house for 2 weeks. That's when I decided to run away, not knowing where I would go. Of course, I didn't get far. I ended up sitting alone and scared in a nearby park until nightfall. Around 5 a.m., the police found me, and my parents had to come to pick me up. When they brought me home, they decided once and for all to send me to live with my uncle in the village. When they told me their decision, I begged them not to do it. I promised to try harder, to stop disappointing them, and to never attempt to run away again. But they didn't care. They told me I had let them down, and they couldn't handle me anymore. They said they had another child to take care of, and couldn't waste their time on a useless girl who kept failing them. I think that wasn't entirely true. Most of the time, they were simply busy admiring my sister. They only paid attention to me when it was to criticize me for my failures. I continued pleading with them because I didn't want to be separated from them, and, most importantly, I didn't want to lose my sister. She was the only person in our family who treated me kindly. But my parents didn't listen. They made me say goodbye to my sister and even forbade her from visiting me. When I arrived at my uncle's house, I couldn't stop crying for weeks. I just wanted to go back home. I tried calling my parents repeatedly, but they ignored my calls. Thankfully, my uncle and aunt supported me during that difficult time, understanding what I was going through. After a few weeks, I came to terms with my situation and decided to accept things as they were. I continued to stay in touch with my sister. She was the only person who wanted to talk to me, but we had to do it secretly, since she didn't have a mobile phone. I would call her using my uncle's phone whenever my parents weren't home. Fortunately, with the rise of social media, she could communicate with me via computer. Sometimes, when she told me it was safe, I'd call her and we'd talk. My sister and I are still close. We love each other, and that will never change. She always kept me updated about what was happening with her and our parents. 10 years passed without any contact with them. Initially, they didn't want to talk to me after leaving me at my uncle's place. Later, I didn't want anything to do with them myself. They abandoned me, and, In my opinion, that was the end of the story. To be honest, moving to my uncle and aunt's house made my life much better. They didn't put the same pressure on me as my parents did, and my academic performance improved. While I was still an average student, and not an outstanding one like my sister, at least I stopped failing. My uncle and aunt allowed me to participate in school plays and sports activities my parents never permitted, claiming they would negatively affect my grades. Living with them, I finally had a full and happy life. When I lived with my parents, they also forbade me from interacting with boys, as they believed it would distract me. My uncle and aunt didn't impose such ridiculous restrictions and allowed me to talk to anyone I wanted. They even let me invite friends over. Interestingly, it was thanks to this freedom that I met my husband. We've been together for 7 years. We started dating in high school, were inseparable, and even attended the same college. Last year, we graduated together, and a week after graduation, we got married in a modest ceremony. Last month, we welcomed our son into the world. I no longer live with my uncle and aunt. My husband and I bought a house just a few blocks away from them. We visit each other often, giving them plenty of opportunities to see our baby. I am currently on maternity leave and due to return to work in a few weeks. For the past several years, my sister has openly stayed in touch with me. When she turned 18, she decided she no longer needed to hide our relationship from our parents. They could no longer control her, and there was nothing they could do about it. She was my maid of honor at my wedding, and is now the godmother of my son. Last week, during a visit, my sister told me that our parents planned to reach out to me. They still didn't know I was married or that I had a child, as almost no one had spoken to them since they abandoned me. What they did was so heartless that no one in the family felt the need to share anything about my life with them, not even my sister, despite their questioning. After 10 years, they finally seemed to feel some remorse and decided to contact me. My sister felt it was her duty to warn me, so I could decide how to handle it and avoid being caught off guard when they reached out. A few days after my sister's visit, my parents contacted me through social media, asking if they could visit me. There was no apology, just a simple message from both of them asking if they could come by, nothing more. I was a bit disappointed by their message, as I had hoped they would at least start by apologizing for their past behavior. For a while, I was so angry that I considered not responding at all. But then an idea came to me. Instead of ignoring them, I decided to invite them over. I wanted to show them how wonderful my life had become without them. I gave them my address and invited them to dinner over the weekend. I also invited my uncle, aunt, and sister. Naturally, my husband and son would be present since the dinner was at our home. I didn't tell my uncle and aunt that my parents would be there, so they were visibly shocked when they saw them that evening. This happened 3 days ago, and I'm still unsure if I did the right thing. The atmosphere was incredibly awkward. I hadn't seen my parents in a decade, and the whole family had cut ties with them. This included my uncle and aunt, who had no desire to interact with them either. The reason for this estrangement stemmed from my parents' broken promises. They had assured my uncle they would provide both financial and emotional support while I lived with him, so that I wouldn't feel abandoned. However, they only followed through on the financial part. Emotional support was entirely absent. They were simply relieved to be rid of me. This wasn't the agreement my uncle had envisioned, and he was deeply hurt by their neglect. Despite this, he didn't object to caring for me and even defended me against other relatives. This led to a conflict between him and my father, resulting in much of the family turning away from my father. My father continued sending money until I turned 18, but after that, all communication ceased. When everyone arrived, we greeted each other, and then I decided to make a toast before dinner. As if the tension wasn't already high, I chose to make things even more uncomfortable. I wanted my parents to feel regret and understand what they had done to me. I stood up and began speaking about how amazing the past 10 years of my life had been compared to the first 12. I dedicated my speech to my uncle and aunt, acknowledging all they had done for me over the past decade. I expressed how I wouldn't have achieved what I have today without their support. I also thanked my husband for always being by my side, and my sister for not abandoning me despite the difficulties. Very deliberately, I excluded my parents from my speech, as I had nothing to thank them for. They noticed this, and their discomfort was palpable. They sat in silence, avoiding eye contact. At the end of my speech, I decided to twist the knife a little more. I turned to my parents and said I was happy to introduce them to my new family. They were visibly shocked. They hadn't expected such a statement. My mother burst into tears and ran out of the house, with my father following her. I didn't try to stop them because I felt they deserved it after all the years of neglect and cruelty. My husband and sister later told me they thought I had gone too far and shouldn't have been so harsh with my parents. But in my opinion, I merely stated the facts. They were the ones who abandoned me, and all this drama could have been avoided if they had made different choices. When my parents left, dinner continued in heavy silence, and no one stayed for dessert. In a way, I was relieved because the entire situation had been overwhelmingly difficult. I don't love my parents, but I'm also not sure if what I did was right. I haven't spoken to my uncle and aunt yet, but both my sister and my husband think I went too far. They believe that if I didn't want to interact with my parents, I should have ignored their message altogether. Inviting them over for dinner, only to humiliate them, was, in their view, unnecessary. Does that make me a villain for inviting my parents to dinner and then confronting them so harshly? Let's pause here for a moment to reflect on this question, and now let's move to the update. Update 1. The feedback about whether I should apologize to my parents has been mixed. However, everyone seems to agree that I should at least talk to my uncle and aunt. For now, I've decided to leave the question of my parents unresolved and focus on speaking with my aunt and uncle. A week has passed since the disastrous family dinner, and we haven't talked much. I've been busy, and so have they. Today, I finally gathered the courage to call my aunt. Before she could say anything, I immediately apologized for inviting my parents to dinner without warning her. She admitted she was a bit shocked at first, but eventually made peace with it. She also told me she hadn't called me earlier because she wasn't sure how I was feeling after that evening, given how upset I had looked. She agreed that the dinner was awkward but assured me that she holds no grudge and has moved on. Next, I called my uncle and apologized to him as well. He responded similarly. Now that I've apologized to both of them, I feel less guilty. Honestly, I don't think I owe my parents an apology after everything they did to me during my childhood. Most people wouldn't find my behavior unfair under the circumstances. They still haven't apologized to me, so I see no reason to apologize to them. I discussed this with my husband since he had suggested I apologize to my parents. I explained that while my actions at dinner might have been inappropriate, their treatment of me in the past was far worse. He seemed to understand my perspective and didn't push the issue further. I said the same to my sister. She was a bit skeptical but ultimately agreed that, as the victim, it's up to me to decide how to handle the situation. My sister hasn't contacted our parents in the past week either. They've been suspiciously quiet. I suspect they're lying low for now, but I'm sure they'll resurface, either demanding an apology or creating more drama. Update 2. First, let me clarify something. My sister isn't trying to play diplomat by maintaining good relations with our parents. Even if that were the case, I wouldn't mind. It's her choice, and there's nothing wrong with it. I've noticed some comments criticizing her for this, and I want to address that. She fully understands how terribly they treated me, but at the time, she was too young to do anything about it. She couldn't stand up for me or protest. Our opinion simply didn't matter back then. She did what she could, maintaining a secret relationship with me, and that's enough. The reason she still talks to our parents is that they're getting older, and she doesn't want to abandon them. There's no hidden agenda here. So please stop blaming her. It's unnecessary, and we share a lot of love and trust. These comments are unfair. Now, on to what happened next. As I mentioned in the previous update, I was almost certain my parents wouldn't let the dinner go and wouldn't accept the situation calmly. They're not the kind of people who can let go of grudges. Today, they finally made their move. 10 days after the dinner, they decided to take the conflict public and posted about it on social media. It was quite unexpected because they'd never been particularly active online. But for this occasion, they made an exception. As I suspected, the post was a one-sided account where they described how hurt and offended they were, conveniently omitting their own actions in the past. Honestly, I wouldn't have cared about this post at all if it had been directed solely at our relatives. Most of them already avoid my parents because of how they treated me. When my parents posted about the situation online, they didn't just tag me. They tagged my colleagues and even my husband's colleagues, who had absolutely nothing to do with this entire story. Naturally, my colleagues were shocked to find themselves tagged in such a post, as they knew nothing about my past conflicts with my parents. My phone started buzzing with messages almost immediately. Since I'm on maternity leave, I hadn't been checking social media often. I've been too busy with my son. But when my colleagues began messaging me, asking for explanations, I was stunned. I didn't know how to react, as I never anticipated my parents would take such a low blow. I'm sure they found my colleagues' accounts by browsing my profile and photos, where I often tag them. They must have spent the past week digging into my connections to harm my reputation. When I finally saw the post, I was shocked for a few minutes, but then I decided to comment and share the truth. I had nothing to hide in this situation. I was the victim. What happened during the dinner might have been inappropriate, but it was not unjustified. In my comment, I detailed everything: how they left me with my uncle, refused to maintain contact, and didn't even apologize when they reached out years later. Even during the dinner, they didn't offer an apology. If they had, I might not have said what I did. But I don't believe I was in the wrong. I also explained the situation to my colleagues, apologizing to them because they certainly shouldn't have been dragged into this mess. What my parents did was absurd. Of course, I'm angry that they chose to involve others instead of addressing me directly. This is a low blow and utterly unacceptable. I'm currently waiting for my husband to return home. I didn't want to bother him at work because he mentioned having an important client meeting today. Honestly, this is just petty drama, and I can handle it myself. I've already talked to my sister, who thinks our parents have lost their minds. She believes they couldn't handle the perceived disrespect they experienced at dinner and simply lost control. That's likely true, but it still doesn't excuse their behavior. I haven't told my uncle and aunt about this yet because I'm sure their reaction will be highly emotional. They'll likely want to intervene, and I don't want to burden them with this issue when they're busy with their own lives. Update 3. A few hours have passed since my last update. It's now 8 p.m., and everyone, my uncle, aunt, sister, and husband, is at my house. We're trying to figure out how to deal with this situation. I don't want to involve a lawyer, as many of you have suggested. I simply don't have the time or energy to file a lawsuit and handle the legal process. At this point, it's unnecessary. I want to resolve this privately, without legal intervention, at least for now. Of course, if they refuse to delete the post, I might have no choice but to pursue legal action for defamation or something similar. But until then, we're trying to handle it ourselves. All of us, my husband, sister, uncle, aunt, and I, have sent messages asking them to remove the post, but they haven't responded to any of them. At least they haven't deleted my comment yet, so those who see the post can read the truth. Unfortunately, the post is gaining traction, which is bad for me. In it, I don't come across in the best light. Not only have my colleagues seen it, but some acquaintances have also come across it. I'm not sure how it appeared in their feeds, probably because I was tagged in it. I've since removed my tag, but people are still reaching out to me, asking questions. It's becoming incredibly frustrating to explain the same thing over and over when they could just read my comment and move on. For some reason, they feel the need to contact me directly and ask the same questions repeatedly. It's starting to irritate me, and I just want this to be over. Honestly, I'm praying that HR doesn't get involved because this could cause serious problems for me at work. I don't want my reputation at work to be damaged because of my parents. For now, my family and I are still trying to persuade my parents to delete the post, but they're completely ignoring us. Tomorrow, my sister plans to visit them in person to ask them to take it down. Hopefully, this will work. If they refuse, we'll have no choice but to consult a lawyer. I sincerely hope it doesn't come to that, because it will take time and energy that I'd rather spend enjoying my maternity leave with my son. This time is meant for bonding with him, not dealing with my parents' absurd antics. Update 4. Today, my sister visited our parents and spoke with them for about an hour. I didn't know how their conversation went until half an hour ago when she told me everything. My parents admitted that they were very upset, which is why they made that post and tagged my colleagues. My suspicions were confirmed. They had indeed found my colleagues' accounts by monitoring my online activity. It's creepy, but honestly, not the biggest issue at this point. According to my sister, the conversation was lengthy. My parents said they were willing to delete the post, but only if I apologized to them. I immediately told my sister that wasn't going to happen. I hadn't done anything wrong and had no reason to apologize. Fortunately, she understood my stance and relayed to them that I would never apologize for something I wasn't at fault for. She also warned them that if they didn't take the post down, I'd contact a lawyer, and they'd have bigger problems. The negotiations went on for almost an hour. In the end, they agreed to delete the post and put the matter to rest. However, they also told my sister that they were officially cutting me out of their lives and disinheriting me. Honestly, I couldn't care less. I just wanted the post removed. They can keep their inheritance. It means nothing to me. My husband and I are doing well on our own. We have stable careers, and I know we'll remain financially independent no matter what happens. I never wanted to rely on their money in the first place. My sister also said she explained my feelings to them, so at least now they understand where I stand. With this issue finally resolved, I can focus on spending the rest of my maternity leave with my son and cherishing every moment. I need to prioritize what truly matters and not waste time or energy on unnecessary drama. Thank you all for your support. Feel free to share your thoughts about this story in the comments. I've noticed that some of you speculate whether this story is made up. Let me address that. When I first read this type of story, I also thought, how could something like this happen? But the truth is, situations like these are not as impossible as they seem. I have a friend who experienced something similar in real life, though in her case, she chose to live with her aunt. If you grew up in a loving, stable family, it might be hard to imagine, but these scenarios are real for some people. Whether this story is fictional or not, I encourage you to reflect on the fact that such situations do occur. Share your opinions and similar experiences in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspectives. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support means a lot to me. Take care of yourselves.